It's a tremendous pleasure to be here today, and especially to be with all of you on Foreign Affairs Day. It's especially an honor to follow Ray Ewing and Kenton Keith to this podium. This I am not worthy. Such incredible professionals who have served our great republic with such enormous distinction for so long. And regarding Ambassador Keith, I had the pleasure of being inspected by him. And it was a pleasure. First, because he brought with him a superb team that engaged with us in a very thoughtful and helpful way, which I realize is unusual to say about an inspection team, which means that we didn't come out so bad. But more importantly, I had the opportunity over the many weeks that he and his team were in Brazil to talk with him about many things. And not just my mission at that point in time, but also about public diplomacy. And I had a rare opportunity to get insight into the amalgamation of USIA and the State Department, the role he played in negotiating that, but also the misgivings he had about that process and his continued reflection on it, which he's just shared with you to a certain extent. But I have to tell you, public diplomacy has not left Ambassador Keith behind. And although he might have some doubts about social media and its importance, what has struck me over time is the importance of public diplomacy in our diplomacy and in our foreign policy. And by that, I don't mean public diplomacy as a branding exercise or as a public relations exercise, but as a fundamental understanding of what diplomacy is, which he hinted at when he talked about people-to-people engagement and the last 3 feet. But from my point of view, it actually goes beyond this. It's really about how we design our foreign policy. It's how we understand the needs and necessities of those we deal with, both at a national level and at a regional and community level, and the extent to which we are capable not only of explaining ourselves to others and making our diplomacy public, but how we are able to take the information we gain and build it back into a foreign policy that allows our policy approaches to be relevant and meaningful to the people we are dealing with. And this still remains a huge challenge for us, because our tendency is to understand people's problems through our own lens, devise solutions from our own perspective, and then present them to them as if we are giving them something meaningful and useful, when in fact, these policy processes and the solutions that we help people with tend to have success only when people understand them as something that will allow them to be successful, allow their countries and their communities to be successful, and allow us to help them address their problems in a meaningful fashion. And in that regard, I don't think Kenton Keith has been left behind by anything or anybody, so sir, I congratulate you. It's a tremendous pleasure, obviously, to have you all here today and to have a full schedule of events for you. And we look forward to your engagement, as Arnie noted, in the whole set of breakout sessions with all the different regional and thematic bureaus to address issues that are important to us and that are important to all of you. When I was given my briefing paper today, you all were referred to as retirees, which I guess is true. I like the term veterans better, which you because it first of all underscores the battles that you have all been in, but it also, I believe, highlights the continuing relationship between all of you and all of us. Because, as I've noted in other occasions, the foreign affairs community and those of us who work in it, the foreign service, the civil service, our intelligence communities, our law enforcement communities, our military community, have taken on roles in life that are much larger than a career, they're much larger than a job. They're even larger than a profession. It's really a vocation. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of engaging in the world. It's a way of engaging that involves not only us, but our families and all of us we take with us when we go overseas or work on the kinds of issues we've all been working. And so from our point of view, being able to sit down with you today, being able to talk through the policy challenges we have, and getting your feedback, getting your understanding, listening to your concerns and responding to your questions is very important. And it's not just an exercise in outreach. It really is an exercise in wisdom. It's an effort to tap into what you know and what you understand and try to factor it in to what we're doing. And it's especially important at this point in time, not only because the United States is an election year, not only because we're heading into a campaign that is going to be unique for many of us, because I've never seen anything like what we're going to see over the next couple of months. But especially for those of you that don't live in the greater Washington area, for those of you who come from Duluth, Minnesota, how you understand what's happening in our heartland, how you understand what is percolating through our communities, and how people understand the United States' role in the world and what it means is going to be hugely important. And Arnie mentioned that you all are advocates for us. You all have a special role in helping other Americans understand why it's important for us to remain engaged in the world. And this, I believe, is going to be one of the big challenges we face over the next bunch of months and into the new administration, which is fashioning an American diplomacy and a broader foreign policy structure that is going to allow us to stay engaged in a meaningful fashion and not view the world as a set of problems or a set of dangers, but actually as huge opportunities that invite us into a larger global process with huge benefit for the United States. But as we look into this election year and understand the role you can play, I think it's important to look for ways to highlight the importance of diplomacy. For the past nearly 2 decades, we've been at war in one place or another. And this constant conflict has defined how many Americans understand our engagement in the world. And if you look at polling data about how Americans react to the rest of the world and how they attempt to think about or reflect about what we do in the rest of the world, there's an increasing reluctance to believe that our future is tied to the rest of the world. And you can understand that when you realize that the news that is presented to them is largely about fighting. It's largely about us killing somebody or us being killed by somebody. And in this regard, we really need to help fashion a broader narrative. And I know that in this department and in our Secretary of State, who you will be seeing later today, you'll have an opportunity to engage with people and with a secretary who is not only committed to diplomacy as a form of foreign engagement, but is committed to diplomacy as really the future of the United States in this world. Because if we've learned anything over the past 2 decades of conflict, is that our military might protects us and it carries us to a point, but it doesn't get us to a strategic win. In order to be able to shape the world strategically in the way we want to, we need to have not only a strategic vision and purpose, but the capacity to build partnerships and alliances that are meaningful and sustainable and enduring. And in order to do that, we need to understand what other people want to accomplish, what other people's values are, how they understand the world, and how we fit into a larger region. And although as a great military power, we have the ability to project that power anywhere at any time, we do not have the ability to project it everywhere all the time. And this requires us to make very clear decisions and strategic choices about where we're going to put ourselves militarily, but more importantly, it requires us to build a diplomatic capacity and a diplomatic structure that can have us forward deployed, expeditionary, everywhere, all the time. That's what our diplomacy is. Our military can't be there, but we can, as foreign service officers, as the civil service, as national security professionals. And all of you are going to help us make that argument in your communities, that at the end of the day, diplomacy is what's going to save our great republic. But also, that diplomacy is transforming itself. When I came into the Foreign Service in 1984, I came in what was a hot part of the then Cold War, which was Central America. But the world that I dealt with as a young diplomat was nothing like the world that young diplomats deal with today. We weren't worried about climate change. We weren't worried about food security. We weren't worried about energy security. We weren't worried about public health beyond mother and child health issues and some kind of broad issues of epidemics. there was a whole kind of a range of issues that we deal with regularly now that, that weren't a key part of how we engage with the world. And we have a substantive aspect to our diplomacy, which is expanding like our universe at the speed of light. And it's going to require our new officers to have enormous intellectual agility and flexibility as they work across a huge realm of issues. But also what we're going to increasingly find is that the kinds of negotiations we undertake and the agreements that we form are going to be highly technical in nature, like the climate change agreement, like the agreement with the nuclear agreement with Iran. But that these agreements, which masquerade as a non-proliferation agreement or an agreement to reduce carbon emissions, actually have profound political impact, profound economic impact, and profound cultural impact. And all of you as foreign policy professionals, as people who have spent your lives thinking strategically about issues, are well placed to connect the fairly narrow content of an agreement with its larger political and strategic impact. And I really ask you to think about that today as you engage with the different members of the State Department who are going to be briefing you and talking with you. But as we think about what's coming beyond the elections, we're also going to face a significant transition here at the State Department. And I've had the pleasure of being in Washington for 3 transitions. And there's a few qualities that are apparent in all of them. First of all, the pace of action increases, it doesn't decrease. And this is all the product of a heightened sense of mortality. I mean, we all know when the trap door is going to open. And because of this, there's a real drive to get stuff done. And as we push to get stuff done, government actually shrinks, and power actually coalesces around people who can make decisions. And John Kerry is one of those people. And so we're pretty certain that the State Department is going to be moving as fast as possible until January 20th and accomplishing as much as possible until we get to that transition. But this department is also preparing beyond that transition and recognizing that as we begin to understand what we've accomplished over the last 8 years, that it's not a historical legacy we're interested in. We're interested in a legacy that we can hand off. In other words, we're looking for continuity across a divide and policy stability across a divide. And again, this is an area where all of you can help us as you engage today to kind of put the pieces together and help shape a broader narrative that will not only explain to the American people what we've accomplished, but what the United States as a nation intends to accomplish. So I really ask you to reflect on that as you engage today. And let me close by just picking up on some numbers that Arnie mentioned. He noted that 58% of the Foreign Service and the Civil Service has only been in service for less than 10 years. It's a pretty remarkable figure when you think about it. I mean, it's almost 60% of our Foreign Service and Civil Service, and it's only been around for 10 years, which means, first of all, that this cadre of officers has only been serving during times of war, and for the most part, during a single administration. So this is going to be their first transition. And their understanding of diplomacy is being shaped by the kinds of conflicts we face around the globe. This is both good and bad. On the good side, our young officers, really are junior officers, because some of them aren't so young, but our newer officers, the new cadres of officers, have experiences that took me 15 or 20 years to get when it comes to working with our armed forces, our intelligence community, and our law enforcement community. And they have become a different kind of national security professional. They're much more sophisticated. They've served in war zones, in conflict zones, and we in the Foreign Service and the Civil Service haven't had this since the Vietnam War. I'm sure many of you remember that. But for the department, it's a big challenge to pull these people in from the field and try to value their experience, to try to understand their experience and look for ways to learn from that experience, but also to ensure that we find ways to help these officers take that experience and use it in a meaningful way. And I'm not sure that a lot of our bureaucratic structure right now is positioned for that or even has the mentality to understand what this influx of new officers is going to mean for how we go about and do our business. But as we think about these new security professionals, because many of them have served in conflict zones. Many of them don't understand traditional diplomacy. They're much more familiar with the United States as a director of events and as a forcer of events, as one that actually influences, mediates, facilitates, and quietly moves people. Which means that as we bring them back to Washington and as we work with them through FSI and our other kind of training mechanisms and our mentoring, we need to find ways to do some remedial work. On one hand, they're incredible officers with this enormous experience and an accelerated growth path, but in other areas they need to be taught some very basic skills. And this is something that we're going to be focusing on as we work over the next couple of years to ensure that we get the connectivity between the older foreign service and civil service and the new foreign service and civil service in the right place. And that's where someone like Arnie Ciccone is going to play such an important role, and our larger human resources department is going to play such an important role, and the National Foreign Affairs Training Center and the Foreign Service Institute are going to play such important roles. But it's also where you all can play an important role. And this is something new and that I've been kind of thinking about. But we need to build connectivity and alumni networks, to use a phrase, that allows some degree of mentoring and allows sharing of experiences. Because all of you have an understanding of diplomacy and foreign affairs and policy, which is hugely valuable and meaningful, and would be especially meaningful for our newer foreign service professionals who are really in a place right now where they need to understand better how diplomacy works. This is true for the Foreign Service, it's true for the Civil Service. So, as I close, I just want to say that this is a special moment for us. This is a special day for us at the department. It gives us an opportunity to engage with all of you and learn from you, but also to think about what your continuing role is in shaping not just our foreign policy and explaining it in the United States and the larger world, but also how you can help us be a better institution. You know, this auditorium is named after Dean Acheson. And when Dean Acheson wrote his book, President to Creation, he noted that in anticipating the challenges the United States was going to face after World War II, that the men and women that took on the challenge of building a new world did so with three qualities. First, enthusiasm. Second, determination. And third, complete ignorance of the challenge they were going to face. I can tell you that we're enthusiastic and we're determined, but we know exactly what challenge we face. We are not ignorant. So there's no excuse. We will be judged. Thank you very much.
Time for a couple of quick questions. We have microphones in the aisles if you'd like to address the Undersecretary with your question.